And I'm very happy to be here with you. And first, I would like to thank Alberto, Ocean, and Christine for inviting me to this lecture and giving me the opportunity to present my dissertation project to this audience. And first, I will talk briefly about the corpus of fragments I'm studying, the Württemberg fragments. Then I will introduce you to 3 digital approaches that play an important role in analyzing the corpus and in my own work. I hope to give you an overview of the situation in Southwest Germany and some methodological approaches which we can then discuss afterwards. And I hope I can tell you something new and something interesting for your own work. Württemberg is now known as part of the federal state of Baden-Württemberg in Southwest Germany. But when I talk about the fragments of Württemberg, I'm referring to the historical Württemberg, which was a dukedom until 1805, and then a kingdom until 1918. Until the German mediatization, Württemberg was a completely Protestant territory. On the map is the larger orange part, and I'm not sure if you see the mouse, this part was the old Württemberg. But after 1803, it gained many new territories, including those that were Catholic, such as the estates of monasteries of Zwiefalten and Ellwangen. With these new territories, Württemberg also took all the archival records and with them thousands of binding fragments into its state archives, which therefore have a truly complex provenance, as you can imagine. The region also has a very turbulent history, and there are many reasons why liturgical manuscripts were destroyed and reused. First and foremost are the liturgical reforms, the biggest turning point certainly being the Reformation introduced in 1534. But we must also consider the production of new manuscripts and library revisions. This was often the case in the Catholic areas, where we find the same destruction of liturgical manuscripts as in the Protestant areas. But for Southwest Germany, the major military destructions, such as the German Peasants' War in 1524 or the 30 Years' War, are maybe much more significant. There are therefore thousands of manuscript fragments in the archives, most of which are unknown, covering all medieval book genres from the 8th to the early 16th century. According to my estimate, 70% are text manuscripts and 30% have musical notation. And almost all of these music fragments are liturgical sources that have never been brought to light. This is why Professor Stefan Morand has launched a 5-year project in 2017, funded by the German Research Foundation, to catalog all fragments with musical notation in the institutions Hauptstaatsarchiv Stuttgart, Staatsarchiv Ludwigsburg, and Württembergische Landesbibliothek. The institutions I will explain later. And here's a photo of our team consisting of Stefan Morand, myself, Waltraud Götz, and a guest, Barbara Heck-Huglot. This photo is from 2019. And as you can see, we were pioneers in hygiene even before the pandemic. It was a very dirty work to find all these fragments, much of dust, and yeah, you can imagine, maybe you are all familiar with this kind of work. And we have published all the fragments online on Fragmentarium, but there's also a small catalog with some representative finds and methods. I hope you all know the platform Fragmentarium. If not, please have a look. You can find our fragments and many other fragments there on the platform. Let me briefly show you some interesting fragments. Some of the oldest ones are leaves from missals from the early 11th century. Most of our fragments are classical liturgical sources, but some of them have also remarkable book decoration, such as this fragment with the office for St. Andrew. Although we have almost only monophonic sources, there are a few exceptions, such as this polyphonic gradual on the left, or a fragment from a part book by Jakob Obrecht. So there are a few polyphonic notations in our corpus. Internally, we have created some data tables that are very important for future evaluations. This overview chart contains all the data. In the columns, you can see the shelf marks, the connections and the host volumes, as well as information about the fragments, such as general information, dimensions, script, and musical notation. I will refer to this overview chart a few moments later. In a few moments. Now the project results. All fragments were published on Fragmentarium in December 2022. And we found a total of 1,724 fragments with musical notation dating from the 10th to the 16th century. For some monasteries, these were the first finds of medieval musical sources. And we also have the data tables as a basis for future research. But of course, there's still a lot to do in terms of data analysis, provenance research, and methodological reflection. I will therefore present you 3 digital approaches of my dissertation project that will help us to draw research findings from this huge mountain of data. So, part 1. For data analysis, it is crucial to make some formal distinctions in advance. First of all, we have the fragments. They all have a mother codex, a former mother codex, with some fragments coming from the same codex as others. Then there are the host volumes to which the fragments are or were attached, the archival records. And then these host volumes are kept in archival units that form a collection. What looks quite simple can indeed become complex. Let me give you an example. We have the archival unit A605, A157, which consists of 2 different archival documents. In our case, 2 host volumes, namely 2 fief registers. The first has a single leaf as a wrapper, the second has 2 vertical strips as sewing guards, so those are the fragments. And both sewing guards come from the same mother codex, and so we have in total 1 archival unit, 2 host volumes, 3 fragments, and 2 former mother codices in 1 archival unit. So this is, you see, it's not so easy as it looks. In the overview table, this data is broken down as follows. Each individual fragment has its own number, as does each archival unit, which is only 1 in this case. Fragments from the same mother codex within an archival unit have the addition A and B. These are the 2 sewing guards. The next column numbers all the mother codices that consist of different archival units, and the next numbers the different parts of these codices. You can see that we have a large number of other fragments that belong to these 2 mother codices. Since all the data is formalized and machine readable, it can now be analyzed to answer specific questions. For example, how many different manuscripts we have in the corpus. To find out, we need to filter the data in 2 steps. First, we need to filter out all fragments from the same manuscript within an archival unit. This is 1 archival unit with 2 fragments from the same manuscript, and we filter the second one out. And then we need to filter out all fragments from the same mother codex but other archival units. Like in this case, 2 archival units, but also fragments from the same mother codex. We filter the second out, and there remains 1 fragment from each codex. So in the end, we obtain the exact number of fragments, archival units, and different manuscripts. Of course, the number of manuscripts is not 100% accurate, as connections may have been overlooked, and there may be in fact fewer manuscripts. Nevertheless, it's probably a fairly accurate approximation. In total, therefore, we have around 952 different liturgical manuscripts in our corpus, which is an average of about 2 fragments per codex. Let us now take a look at some diagrams. First of all, the number of dated manuscripts per century in dark blue and per half century in light blue. This diagram shows several developments in the history of Southwest Germany. The number of manuscripts reaches its peak in the first half of the 14th century, which was a time of economic prosperity. In the second half, however, the number falls again due to the economic decline of many monasteries and epidemics, such as the plague. Production increases again in the first half of the 15th century, but then has a decline in the second half of the 15th century. Why? Because it was the beginning of the letterpress printing. So we have few developments in the history which are visible in this graph. But the data is also useful for demonstrating codicological details, such as the average line height. I will give you 4 examples of different line sizes, all containing the word dominus in order to compare them. First, a notation with adiastomatic neumes from the 11th century with a line height of 1 centimeter. This is a fragment from around 1000, from the year 1000. As soon as staves appear, like in the 12th century, the line height doubles. Now it is 2 centimeters. In the 14th century, the line height was sometimes already around 4 centimeters, again twice as high as in the 12th century. But there are also examples of very large codices with a line height of over 8 centimeters. Finally, here you can see the average line height over the centuries, which increases continuously until the 15th century. And the size of books also grows over the centuries, as you can imagine. I will demonstrate this using this virtual bookshelf. From the 11th to the 13th century, the average size of liturgical books increases continuously. So this is the average book size in each half of a century, and this is until the beginning of the 14th century. From the early 14th to the late 15th century, we see a sharp increase until the average size reaches almost 50 centimeters, which is fairly huge because it's an average size, so there must have been much bigger books. In the 16th century, the sizes decrease again as cheaper prints were already available. To compare it, one of our smallest mother codices, a gradual from the early 13th century, must have been 15 centimeters high. This was the smallest one we have in our collection. While one of our largest manuscripts, an antiphonary from the 15th century, was about 80 centimeters high. But we have to be careful when we want to link book size and century, because even in the 16th century, there are small book formats like this ritual, which was suitable for hand use. So that you can imagine the real size of those books, I've placed a medieval monk next to it here. And perhaps you're all familiar with this famous miniature depicting the Renaissance composer Johannes Ockeghem and his chapel singing from a sheet of music. If we assume that this man, perhaps Ockeghem himself, is about 1.7 meters tall, which is the average height of a medieval man, according to some sources, the sheet is about 70 centimeters high. So it belongs to the large choir books I mentioned before from the 15th century, which fits the time when the miniature was created. Incidentally, the leaf does not show a polyphonic composition. It shows a monophonic Gloria melody, which is probably notated in German neume notation on 4 staves, and thus comes from a Kyriade. So it is not a composition by Ockeghem, but it is Gregorian chant. And it's exactly one of those big leaves we found in our fragment corpus. Next, I would like to present you a diagram that shows the number of all archival units with music fragments in our collection in chronological order. Since there are years without and years with many archival items, which is purely coincidental, the graph rises and falls sharply. It therefore makes sense to add a moving average with a period of 10 years. This compensates for the randomness of the data and shows important trends in the history of book maculation. The Reformation was introduced in Württemberg in 1534. In the graph, we see no real impact on the maculation of liturgical manuscripts at this time. Perhaps most of them were still in use at this point. Whereas after 1555, the Peace of Augsburg, where Württemberg definitely became a Protestant region, we see a steep increase. So this is a first peak in the maculation. After that, the production of fragments seems to be relatively constant. But with the beginning of the 30 Years' War, production increases enormously and reaches its peak in the 1650s, when most of the material must have been on the market. So this is the second and largest peak. After that, it decreases steadily again. This peak comes from a single manuscript that was distributed across several archival units. It can be statistically neglected, so the graph just falls down again. And we can see a third, lower peak in the first half of the 18th century, when the Catholic monasteries began to maculate their own sources. So for the first time, such data visualizations can statistically confirm long-held scientific assumptions that were made before but never could be proved. Comparing data sets. Analyzing data also helps to bring fragments from the same source together. When I was looking for fragments in the Municipal Archive of Reutlingen, which is a small town near Stuttgart, I discovered several fragments that I knew belonged to the fragments from Stuttgart. But it was impossible to put them together from memory because we had so many of them. So I applied a data filter in our overview chart with all the data from the Reutlingen fragments. I will demonstrate this using this antiphonary fragment from the middle of the 14th century. These are the data of the Reutlingen fragment, and this is an excerpt of the overview chart. And of all 1,724 fragments, there were only 2 matching results. And as the paleographic analysis proves, all 3 fragments come from the same source. This could be an important tool for future research, as well as for the application of artificial intelligence. And I think it's very helpful to bring fragments from different countries and institutions together, as they do in Finland and Sweden. So this is, I think, quite a good method. Last but not least, I would like to show you an example of a virtual reconstruction. One of the main goals of fragmentology, the new discipline, which concerns fragments. To decide whether to make a physical or virtual reconstruction, we need to consider the following criteria. Are the fragments loose or in situ? Is it one archival unit or several? Are there major gaps in the sequence of fragments? For a physical reconstruction, we need loose fragments, preferably from one archival unit and without major gaps in between them. For virtual reconstruction, we can also work with in situ fragments, several archival units, and major gaps. All 3 criteria should therefore be met for a physical reconstruction, whereas only one is sufficient for a virtual one. I'll show you an example. Let's take a look at this noted breviary, which consists of small choir guards. All 3 criteria for a physical reconstruction, loose fragments, one archival unit, and no major gaps, are fulfilled, so that a physical reconstruction is possible without any problems. So we made this in the archive, we put them together and made a photo. So this is a physical reconstruction without any problem. But what is this one all about? In this case, we found fragments in 30 different host volumes in 11 archival units from the years 1640 to 1661, probably bound shortly thereafter. There are 2 different manuscripts that were used as sewing guards, and the first one is this Franciscan gradual from the 15th century, which consists of 41 fragments from 6 former leaves of the Codex. To make a long story short, it's a mess, and the most complex case in our collection. So what to do with this one? My colleague Waltraud Götz made a big puzzle and a reconstruction of the 6 leaves in tabular form. The 4th leaf, for example, consists of 18 fragments coming from 11 host volumes, 5 archival units. The archival units are the different colors in the chart. As you can see, a physical reconstruction is impossible. Why? We don't have loose fragments. The fragments are in situ. There are several archival units, and we have major gaps in the sequence of fragments. So we have to do virtual reconstructions, the only possibility. And to reassure you in advance, these 2 fragments you can see on the left side, they belong together and we can sort them already in the first step. This is the good news. I used a manuscript for comparison, a gradual from the Franciscan monastery of Fribourg in Switzerland. The piece that we want to reconstruct on the fourth leaf is the introit Redimeme for the Monday of the second week of Lent. You can see the introit on the right side in the Fribourg source from Switzerland. And for the reconstruction of the gaps, I used a special character repertoire that I created using image sections. There are musical elements, such as different note heads or clefs, as well as different text fonts for the main text and the initials. The reconstruction itself took place in several steps. First, I had to reconstruct the dimensions of the original page by using the largest fragment. You can see the largest fragment here on the left side. Then I was able to make a page template with the original dimensions. Then it was possible to arrange the fragments on this template with millimeter precision using Waltraud-Götz tables. This is the result. You can already get a first impression of the original page. In the next step, I filled in the gaps with our Fribourg comparison manuscript. So this is what it looks like. And of course, there may have been small musical differences, but the Franciscan tradition is relatively stable so that we can be really sure that this is the melodic version of the original source. Next, we can visualize the bookbinder's cuts. He first cut the leaf into 5 vertical strips and then into smaller ones. The yellow parts are those parts that are still missing today, or perhaps have been lost. We don't know for sure. Of course, we can now make the missing parts virtually visible again. This could help to identify and place the missing fragments one day if they are found. This is recto and this is verso, so this is the whole introit. And if we finally match the colors, we can virtually bring the fragmented leaf back to life. And this is what the complete leaf might have looked like. So this manuscript has been brought back to life, at least a few leaves of the manuscript, and you can see this reconstruction as well on Fragmentarium. If you are interested, please write me an email and I can send you the link. I hope I have been able to give you a good insight into my work. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.